Well, good morning and good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for this exciting webinar, which is Unlocking Studio Designer Key Strategies for Procurement. So my name's Anthony, for those of you who I haven't met or haven't met me, and we're actually really thrilled to bring you another engaging and insightful discussion led by these two outstanding experts. So first, I'd like to introduce Julia for those of you who have not met her, one of our longtime consultant partners. Julia has been an invaluable part of the studio designer community. She hosts numerous webinars for us, helping our users master all the things accounting with her deep expertise and approachable teaching style, on top of running her own consulting firm, New Age Financial Consulting. Joining Julia is none other than Studio Designer's very own CEO, Keith Granet. Keith's leadership here and vision have shaped Studio Designer into the powerful platform it is today. And we are excited to hear his insights about what both of them are going to be speaking about. So we encourage you to participate in this webinar by submitting your questions in the chat. So there's a little question mark box in your Zoom toolbar. Click that, and at any time during the webinar, drop your questions in there. That way we can field them as we go along or finish up at the end and make sure you get all the answers you came looking for. With that being said, Julia and Keith, take it away.
Great. Thanks, Anthony.
Thank you, Anthony. What a lovely intro. I'm actually going to get started and share my screen. So we're going to be going through, I think, a interesting topic, right? One that is heavily involved in the design community, the design business, and that's really procurement, which is a big term, right, Keith? It's a big word. It means a lot of different things, I think, to a lot of different people. I think it could be really amazing at some firms and, you know, a really hard avenue to manage at others would be some thoughts of mine.
Yeah, I mean, Julia, it's typically the bread and butter of a business, interior design business, where some people would like to have all of their expenses covered by their hourly billing, and then the procurement side of it becomes profit. Doesn't always work out that way, as we know, but certainly it's a significant revenue stream and should be taken very seriously. That's why we picked this subject to really dive deep into.
And just as I think a friendly reminder too, so one of the reasons we are talking about procurement, where it impacts all of us so heavily, but additionally, it is a topic at the user conference. And we're going to do a deep dive really into what I would always call tips and tricks and efficiencies, and really making sure that the design community understands, I actually think, the power of the software, right? The Studio Designer software, and how it could help us on the efficiency side of procurement and of purchasing. So here we are.
Yeah, thank you for also bringing up the conference, which is our first user conference ever in Miami in February. And we encourage everyone to try to attend. We are getting down to a limited number of seats. So if you have not signed up, we encourage you to do so. It's going to be a very action-packed, knowledge-packed, fun-packed time in Florida.
Great time of year to get away from the cold. We've been bringing it up to our clients and our firms, I would say, more and more over the last couple of weeks. Also a great time to connect with others in the industry. As we all know, it is amazing what those types of connections can bring to a firm, and really just exchanging information with how others are doing it, how firms of the same size or different sizes are doing it. And we will have several tracks in terms of what type of attendee should attend. And it really is anyone, everyone, and anyone. So if you're in the accounting side, or if you're a beginner user or you're an advanced user, I think there's something to learn from many of the sessions that we'll be covering.
I think that there's no other place where you're going to see that many people who are your peers in one place to basically, be able to network with and learn about other businesses.
Yes, and their processes, right? And so that actually just lets us begin talking about procurement, right? And one of the things I think we get asked a lot from my standpoint is, well, how do you become more efficient in terms of our procurement process? It could be so granular and such a big time suck, right? Whether you have somebody dedicated to the position or a designer is doing it. But we always, honestly, almost every single one of our conversation goes back to what's that process look like for you? And how are you utilizing the software to achieve those efficiency goals? So some of the examples we have listed are very wonderful priority status colors, right? Those little circles on the item back in the day, right? Back in the desktop day, you used to only have 3 colors, and it was the traffic light, right? It was red, yellow, and green. And now we have, I believe, 10 with even more coming. By the way, that's a very exciting piece of information. So more colors are coming because that's a request, right? Keith and I talked about this last night. That's a request that we get all the time in terms of when are there more colors coming. My recommendation is always we get rid of brown. I don't like the brown color. I want it to go away. But the colors are amazing. They're a tool, right? Like you're supposed to be, you could filter by them. You could add them to any item report. You could add them to a client facing report. That's such a great communication tool. And it's a communication tool internally, and it's a communication tool with any of your, I would say, consulting or finance partners, whoever you're working with in that capacity. So if that's not something you've embraced, and that's not something you have maybe clear definitions for, this is a great time. It's an end of year, right? To say to yourself, okay, how are we using these as a firm, and how can we improve this amazing and really quick communication tool?
Absolutely.
Something else I think to consider in addition to priority colors, and the way we teach it too, is priority colors don't replace your actual expediting codes, right? So on every single item in Studio, the second tab over, it says codes. And if you go to that tab, there's all of those date fields, right? In the date fields, there's a lot of them. I understand that, but they're yet another tool, right? They're there for you to use consistently in the office, to understand when your order was acknowledged, to understand when something was received, to understand when something was delivered. And so all of this leads back to just process, right? So the team needs to know which of the codes are supposed to be always utilized, right? 100% of the time. Commit to, I would say 3, 5, 7. You don't actually have to use all of them, but commit to the ones that you're going to update regularly, and then make sure that they're flowing to whatever type of custom report you would like. Keith, do you want to talk actually about the client 50% or 100% and what that means from an efficiency standpoint?
Yeah, absolutely. It's, we get asked this all the time. It's like, how much should we collect up front from the clients? And, most of the time, the vendors will ask for 50% deposit, but in fabric, we know it's 100, or wall coverings, it's 100. And we just think if you can do it, and it just takes a little convincing to your clients to get 100% up front, because it just makes your life easier, that when you need to place the order, then you don't have to wait for the client to pay when you're ready. It keeps the process moving much more smoothly. Now, some clients will be somewhat skittish about giving 100% up front, especially during, questionable economic times. But really, I mean, some people have put them in escrow accounts so that the money feels like it's protected by the client. But most people can get 100%. And really, it just allows you to hold on to that money so that when it's ready for a purchase order to go through, you don't have to go back to the client. Now, what Julie and I would both warn you of is, just because the cash is in the bank doesn't necessarily mean you can use it. And we've had clients that have gotten in trouble because they're like, oh, I have plenty of money in the bank. It's that saying, I can't be overdrawn, I have more checks. But the truth is that you really need to be protective of that money, that it is designated for that item and not to be used for your overhead. You can pull out your markup percentage and put it into your operating account if you want to at that time. But again, it's not fully earned until it's fully delivered. So you just want to be careful how you manage those funds, but getting the most of it upfront is going to make your life more efficient.
Yep. We recommend that, I would say post-COVID, that's been the recommendation from our perspective for everyone. And yes, there's different schools of thought, and I think some firms are hesitant to do it, but really and again, the way we present it is if you, like you mentioned, if you can do it, then you should. And if you have a client that really pushes back, especially on a long lead time item, then that is okay, right? Then you really can make that exception for a select few items. But the communication out of the gate to the client in any of your documentation in your contract is that you collect 100% upfront, and it's really from an efficiency standpoint. And then we've actually, you know, and Keith, you and I talked about this yesterday. We have a couple of large clients right now, and I was actually surprised by it, but they're collecting their entire purchasing budget upfront. And that could be a very, very large number. That could be, you know, $1 million, 2 million, 3 million. But they have found that there's almost like less scrutiny in those situations, that we're committing to a budget. We're for the most part sticking to the budget, but we're getting that money up front. Be careful with the word escrow. That is a legal and technical term. So just be very careful with how you structure your contracts in terms of, are you actually escrowing funds or are you not? So just again, be careful with that verbiage. But it definitely keeps projects moving faster, and it just alleviates that administrative back and forth of, you owe me another 50%, or we have some clients who have done like 70, 75.
Right.
And so it really takes that out of the equation.
Yeah, and I just want to point out that you should, if you're not, using Studio Pay, because it's the most secure way of transferring money, more so than wires. You know, there's almost zero fraud that can happen through Studio Pay, the way we've set it up. And it just becomes really efficient from the client portal for them just to click pay now and go right into your account.
And one of the quickest and most seamless, really, too.
Yes, for sure.
Another, I think, just common question that I'm sure you get, and I certainly get often, is how is the design firm, how is that team structured? And expediter or expediting, or, you know, the expediting field or role can still exist. I know from my perspective, I'm not seeing it, I would say, too often. I'd be interested to know what you're seeing with your clients.
Well, I have a few clients that actually have a sort of either expediting team or an expediter that really manages all the vendor relationships and works with each design team within the firm. And I'd say that it's probably more the exception than the rule. We always feel like having the junior design staff responsible for the expediting of a project because they're closest to it. They know what the designer selected. They know what the intent is. If it's not in stock or it needs to be replaced, they know how to take more direction than an expediter who's actually just processing the orders through. So they're not typically as engaged in the project team as much as somebody from the actual team working on expediting. That being said, if you actually have a really great way of communicating and you include that expediter, if you have a unique expediter into those client meetings, or not even the client meetings, but the project meetings, then they're fully aware of what's going on and they can sort of update you on the status of all the projects. So it's not like there's an either or here. I think that they both work. It just needs to be structured correctly.
And size, I think size a lot of times dictates it, right? We have larger firms where it's a junior senior combo. And I agree with you. I think when you do have an expediter role, it takes away some of that responsibility from the design team. And a lot of times we then hear that as an excuse, right? Well, you know, I didn't know. I didn't order it. I didn't know. Right. But it goes back to, if you were reviewing your reports, you would have seen that someone missed it or you know, something happened. But we do see the really large firms. There is at least, like you mentioned, one person or even a team who just handles that entire process from start to end. But part of, even if you do have it as a separate part of the design business, that relationship management, right, is really, really critical to make sure that the designer knows what's happening, and that accounting is fully engaged and utilizing the same set of reports, and the same processes that's helpful to both the expediter, right, and the design team.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. I'm an advocate, I think personally, of a junior senior combo. I just think, and I actually, you know, if you ask me, well, why, I think I have to really think about why. I feel like we've seen it be more successful. It allows the juniors to grow and learn all aspects. But it's definitely not for everyone. And like you mentioned, I don't think that there's a right or a wrong either. It really depends on the firm and what those relationships, look like.
Right. And I agree with you. It's size. If it's a big
Mhm.
firm, then they can afford to do that. One thing before you move on that we talked about was just that the relationship between the design team and accounting, because I can't tell you how many times I hear, I had no idea the check arrived from the client, and why didn't we send a purchase order? Or the money arrived 30 days ago. What are we waiting on? And as soon as it comes in, for the accounting department to be able to say the money's in place, I mean, you should be using Studio to know that you've received the funds, so that a purchase order can be sent immediately. And it just slows down the process if you're not communicating well between those teams.
Well, and that's so much of that is reporting, right? And I honestly, it's as soon as a cash receipt comes in, what's your process and who's in charge of it, right? And there's the answer is always there's a report for that.
Exactly. But you should be looking at it daily to know what came in and know what needs to then be generated.
Yes, yes. Oh, yes, 100%. Yes.
Okay. So we want to talk about different fee structures. And
Yeah.
we've gone over this before, but we feel like it's really just important in really understanding the full aspect of purchasing. So Jill, you want to go through a few of these?
Yeah. So I mean, I think we talk about pricing structure sort of probably every time you and I chat, it just comes up. I am aligned with what you said at the beginning, where I love and I urge firms strongly to understand the difference between design fees and then markup. And in a perfect world, yes, those design fees are strong enough to cover all of your what I would call fixed expenses. Right. And so anything either more fluctuating expenses or even additional sort of discretionary expenses are then covered by markup, and then additionally markup is profit, right? So if you're not or if you never have looked at those two buckets separately, that's a really good place to start. And then the follow-up question really to that is, okay, well, so now you know you should be looking at them separately. Well, if you are looking at them separately, how are you charging for one or the other? On the last webinar we did together, we talked a lot about how to charge for design fees. And so now the question is, okay, well, how do I charge for purchasing? And as always in our industry, right? No industry standard. I would say no black and white answer. Lots of different methods come up. Markup is most common. And markup can consist of even markup, right? I mean, we could talk about markup alone in terms of product, I think, for probably an hour on its own. You could mark up by client. Your client contract can go out, and it could say my markup is across the board on every single product I buy, and it's 35%. And that could also mean that you are marking up above retail. That could also mean your contract says you won't mark up above retail. That could also mean your contract states that you're going to share a discount or you're going to split a discount, which means then, right, that the discount percentage that you receive with a vendor would be either shared or split with the client. So even those two little words, right, markup, can mean so many different things in so many different ways.
Absolutely.
Hourly, right? I mean, that's as with design fees, hourly is still a popular option. And I would say we have only a handful of firms, but a few firms who are able to do both. I do think unusual. So they're marking up and they're charging hourly for procurement. I mean, typically hourly fees stop, right? And markup picks up to cover those procurement hours. I mean, do you have anyone that you see that does both?
Yes, a lot that do both, actually.
Okay.
Yeah.
I mean, that's great, right? If they're able to do that, that's just another profit center. The contract needs to reflect that verbiage correctly. Hopefully they're a firm that tracks hours, so then they can really understand the hours associated specifically with purchasing, the cost of the time associated with purchasing, and then the markup of the product as well.
We have clients that actually will charge hourly until the client picks the item, and then the during the procurement process, the markup is what covers their time. And then there are others that just charge hourly for everything plus the markup.
Mhm.
So if you can get away with that, I think obviously it'll be far more profitable.
And if a client doesn't push back. So a lot of times too, right, that initial contract goes out a certain way, and then, potentially there's negotiations that go into effect, and then, markup percentage can go down. Are you seeing anyone with a flat procurement fee?
I have not. You said that you've seen it. I have not seen that.
We've seen, specifically at the moment, I think two firms, both West Coast, and on every single proposal that goes out, there's a flat procurement fee. So there is markup, there is an hourly billing, but the flat procurement fee went up from 10 to 12, I believe, I'm going from memory, and every single proposal goes out with a procurement fee. We've also seen it called like an administrative fee, but procurement fee is most common. It goes at the bottom, again, of a proposal, and that is in the contract though. So that the client understands that we have a markup on product, right? We're selling it at the best price that we see fit. And then in addition, there is this processing fee for all, everything that goes into tracking and ordering and expediting.
Exactly.
Freight is on here because I think, funny, like sales tax, it's just such a big topic, right? And so how do you handle freight? How do you handle marking up freight? Freight, and to me, freight means also the receiving warehouse, right? So they're really both of those things. And is it rolled into the same markup as your contract? Is it different? What are you seeing regarding freight?
Some people will put it more of as a reimbursable, and so they'll probably take a lesser percentage on freight. It's the vein of everyone's existence, freight, period. I mean, because sometimes you don't know exactly where it's going or what the freight charge should be when you want to create the purchase order or the proposal. And, some people will take a percentage and say, I'm always going to charge 10% as a markup on it because I know that it'll be somewhere in that range 10% of the cost of the item. And in some places, sometimes you'll win and sometimes you'll lose. But if it's a fairly healthy number, then you'll be okay. But it's very difficult sometimes to have that exact number when you need it. And so it becomes challenging whether you do it that way versus waiting for, and then hitting your client up later on for freight, and then they get hit with a big bill and they're like, why didn't I know about this? So it's really making sure you communicate well how you address freight to your clients.
Yeah, I love a flat freight model. Again, that really, from my perspective, came about during COVID, where because freight charges were so astronomical and so hard to manage from the client perspective, we saw more and more of that. Obviously, it's less so these days, but still, it becomes this irritable topic of conversation, especially towards the end of a project when somebody's particularly exhausted, right? They're done spending. And so a way to manage that is coming up with a flat freight model. If you could stick to it, it's like the flat procurement fee. It goes on the bottom of every proposal. You do have to do manual math. I mean, that's a part of it. And you will win some and you lose some. You have to come up with a percentage that's I think a good percentage. And if a client is agreeable to it, same, right? Communication goes out in the contract. Communication stays on every single proposal that you send out. And then it's very, very clear on the client side that this is our flat freight model, right? We don't deviate, and they understand that we may be right. We may be up or we may be down, but they're paying it up front. So it's just better expectation.
Yeah, for sure. Stocking dealer.
Oh,
No, it's okay. So basically what that means is that you've built a relationship with the actual vendor, and that you are like a showroom would have, being a stocking dealer or a store, and you get greater margins on that because you're willing to commit sometimes to inventory, sometimes just to a certain dollar amount that you do generate on a regular basis. And then it allows you, so some clients of ours actually set up separate LLCs to move
Mhm.
those types of products to that, and then they sell it back to the design firm. The question sometimes comes up is that, well, if our agreement is 35% or whatever the number of markup is, and I know I'm getting more because I'm a stocking dealer, aren't I really, not being fair or double dipping to the client? And the truth is you're getting that volume discount because you're taking the risk of being a stocking dealer and being able to carry inventory or just the volume that you're generating. So you're getting a discount based upon your volume, not on that particular client, but on your entire practice. So it really is another way of increasing your margins and can be very successful.
I would agree with that. I mean, we have maybe 10%, maybe even more, like 10 to 20% of the design firms we work with have some sort of retail component, some bigger than others. But a lot of times they go into it really for that reason alone. It's not even necessarily that they're looking to sell to the public or they're looking to sell to the trade. If they know they're able to keep up with the demand of a minimum spend with a vendor, it's almost a no-brainer, right? As long as you have the space to make it appear that there's sales happening, it is a really great way to open up margins and really to open up those vendor relationships.
For sure.
Yeah.
And even speaking about vendor relationships when it comes to procurement, for years I've heard this from vendors, is that the clients that are really great at paying their bills get the attention, which makes perfect sense. But if you have somebody who is always late making payments or wants a favor or wants to push things to the front of the line, a vendor will favor you if you're a great customer. But if you're someone who's always difficult or always can't make payments on time, the vendor is going to look at that differently and not necessarily treat you with the same kind of white glove service that you would get if you really, were on top of things and were a great customer to them. So the relationship with your vendor is key to the success of the process.
And I think that something to remember too is the relationship with the vendor, and from a number of standpoint drives your discount, but that discount I think it is negotiated, right? It is negotiable. I think if you're spending a lot of money with a vendor, and actually we try to do this often, especially at the end of a year. If you're using like a collaborative of any kind, or even a showroom to buy specific lines, make sure that on the studio designer side that you're tracking that vendor spend in a very particular way, because you may actually do better going to the vendor directly and you may not realize, and that's okay. But at the end of the year, make sure that someone is looking at that data to say, oh, oh shoot, I had no idea I spent this much money. I should go to see if I keep up this spend. And that's a big if, but you should know your projections, right? So if I keep up this spend, would I be better off working with this vendor directly? Sometimes the answer is yes, sometimes the answer is no. I know last webinar too, Keith, you and I talked about buying fabric by the bolt. I think that goes into the same kind of category, where if you have enough volume and enough buying power and a place to store it, that can also be incredibly, incredibly impactful on your margins.
Absolutely.
Purchasing retainers. So retainers are always, I think, a big topic. Do you take them? Do you not take them? What are your thoughts?
Well, I think what we believe with retainers, period, is it's about commitment. So if a client knows that they're going to spend X amount of money or they're going to be building a significant house, you need a retainer. And it's not just to protect yourself so that if they don't pay a month's worth of bills, that you can take it from the retainer, which is really what it's for. It's really about the client making a commitment to your relationship to them. And so getting a retainer, whether it's for purchasing or whether it's for fees, is very important to understand that commitment.
And everyone uses that term, right? Different way. What does the contract say? Are you taking it and using it in the beginning? Are you taking it and holding on to it at the end? Are you taking it and holding on to it at the end and then giving it back, or applying it to product and or time billing? Does the contract allow you to apply it to both, meaning anything related to fees or product, or does it limit you? So I think a lot of this entire slide, honestly, it just goes back to your contract. Like, what does your contract say? And again, we get a lot of questions of how should I do this? And my answer, I'm telling you every single time is, okay, well, I'm happy to talk through what your future billing practices should look like, but I almost can't even advise on current because I really want to make sure that you're aligned, right? And you're abiding by your contract. So what does your contract say?
Right, exactly.
Yeah. Oh,
Speaking of contracts,
speaking of, how about that? Structuring your design contracts. So I think you're actually really great at articulating this, and I actually think I'm not, right, and I know that I'm not. How do you determine your value, and how do you sort of really believe in that?
and so we pulled out these specific contract issues that we think are really important for you to make sure they're in your contract or make sure they follow what your fee structure is. For instance, a flat markup, it just means that you're going to charge that markup regardless. It could be whether you get a 25% discount from RH or you get a 50% discount from a fabric house, or you get 5% or 10% on another retailer, but that your clients are still going to pay your markup regardless because they're paying for your eye, they're paying for your picking and selecting the product. And sometimes people will say, you can only charge as much as up to retail. But there are clients that say, I'm sorry, even if I buy retail for you, you're going to pay a markup because you took my time and energy and I found the product, and you probably never would have found that. So the not to exceed retail, it's just, again, you just want to make sure that, if you're going to be buying a lot of retail and it says that, the margins are going to be pretty slim. And so you really want to be careful about how much retail you buy. And if have a decent sized practice, you should never really have to pay retail. You should be able to go right to the vendors directly and get better markups. Again, because of your volume. I often say that the model of studio is that we serve clients that, that buy 1,000 sofas a year versus one user that would buy 1,000 users that buy one sofa. It's that volume that makes a difference. And so you should be able to negotiate better discounts based upon where you're purchasing. But sometimes, you may find something that's only available at Bergdorf's or some major retailer, and you still have the ability to mark it up. You just have to be careful how your contract is worded. Then there's like the sliding scale. Some people will do that based upon the volume of the budget for the client. So if you reach $500,000, then we're going to start dropping it down to 30. If you reach $1 million, it'll drop down to 25. From that point forward, it's something to be very careful of because I don't think your work effort changes very much, and I don't know that there is a sort of volume discount when it comes to something like that, because every single item, as we know, takes a lot of effort. One sofa can have 5 or 6 purchase orders. So just be careful if you're going to do a volume discount or there's some economy of scale that there really is. Some of those other, options, which is the next thing, which is by category. If antiques are super expensive or you're buying artwork, yes, you can take lower margins on them because they're a single item, and there's especially antiques and artwork where the antiques, you may be doing some, sort of renovation to whatever that is. But for art, there's not a whole lot that you're doing other than purchasing the piece and hanging it. And so therefore you probably can afford a 25% markup on something like art and even construction materials where you're helping order them, but you're not necessarily touching them the way you would touch something like a sofa.
Well, in construction materials, a lot of times too, you're competing with the contractor. So if the contractor's marking up typically 20%, we usually see construction materials where if you're negotiating who's buying it with the GC directly, that would be marked up 20% as well.
Exactly.
Something we get asked a lot is in terms of actually, I think that especially the top 4, is what's the easiest way to set it up in studio? And that's a great question. I don't necessarily think it has the most straightforward answer. I think the easiest way to set it up in studio is either to mark up across the board by a client, meaning every client has a set discount, regardless, like you mentioned, doesn't matter if it was retail or if it was four hands, or if you walked or you bought something off of Etsy, for example. From there, vendors are, I would say, the next easiest to set up, and different ones override different codes override different codes. So you have client markup, you have vendor markup, and then you have sales code markup. It becomes incredibly challenging if your contracts are so all over the place without any consistency. There really won't be a set way to manage it automatically. You'll have to manually go in and override if the antique markup changes on 12 contracts every single time, as opposed to, well, my normal markup for a contract is 35, but antiques I really am going to discount to 25 because I know I'm buying really expensive antiques, right? So those two settings you could accommodate. But if you really become every single thing is different, I actually think it makes it incredibly challenging, and you're depending on the team and you're actually like setting them up for failure.
Yeah, no, I agree.
Yeah.
And also I want to point out that you could have single items that are a certain amount. So say anything over 50, a single item over $50,000, you may be willing to reduce your markup.
Yeah.
But it doesn't mean that that item is any less complicated to deal with. So just be careful when you do something like that, because if it's a very high-end piece that needs a lot of sort of kid gloves to manage, you want to make sure you're being covered for the time you're putting into that.
Someone actually asked a great question, which we don't talk about here, but I do think, it comes up often, is what happens if you have clients who want to purchase directly? I mean, in my opinion, and Keith, I'd love to hear yours, is that's a deal breaker, right? That's a non-negotiable. You work with me for so many of these reasons. You love our work, you value, right? You value in us putting the whole thing together for you. So, and not only if they're buying it directly, right? Like, how are you charging for the time associated with the specs? How are you dealing with the fact that they're not able to purchase from a trade discount? We believe, like on so many different levels, it doesn't work typically for the type of firms that we work with. What do you think?
Well, I agree. I mean, I think, and I've seen this just recently, where the designer specified a product and the designer decided, because they can with sort of Google, to find an alternative product. They order it and they're like, the installation's terrible. It's not, this is not working. And the designer was like, well, that's not what I specified. And they said, well, it's looked like the same product. And so then everyone loses across the board, because the reason why maybe the designer, this particular case, the reason why the designer specified that particular product is they had used it before, and therefore they knew what the installation was like. They knew what the quality of the manufacturer. And when the owner picked something completely different that looked the same, it wasn't, and the quality. So everyone lost in that case. And so that if you can push back and say, look, we have relationships with each of these vendors, that we will make sure not only is the best product, but the quality of the service and the delivery, we understand, we've worked with them. And it's difficult if you have clients that like to go shopping and they come back and, like you, they bought 50 ugly pieces, and suddenly you got to figure out how you're going to incorporate that into their house. It does. There's a lack of trust when that happens, and there's a lack of performance on your part as far as what you're going to be delivering, because it's going to be this mixed bag of what the client purchased. And then as soon as the client purchases something and it goes wrong, it's going to be your fault anyway.
Yes. Yeah. Yes.
Right?
Yes.
So I think it's really important that you try as much as possible not let the client do any of the purchasing.
And you really hold your ground, right? Like you genuinely believe in that, and believe in yourself that this is part of the services that you provide.
Yeah.
Somebody else actually mentions a great point as well. Do you need to disclose a percentage of markup? So I think the answer to that, I mean, legally, is no, you don't. I do think different firms handle it in different ways. I would say the majority of our firms are probably disclosing and out of the gate, so the client is aware. But there are definitely firms that don't, and just simply say that they pass along the best price possible, so that way, you know, they're not tied to anything, especially legally too, right? Like they're not tied to a flat markup.
Correct.
Yeah.
Let's just go through the rest of it because we have a
Mhm.
number of more slides to go. But presented price, we actually love this. So presented price is meant for custom product. So if a client says, I want this unique dining room table that you've designed, you should be able to set that price. Because if you took the cost of the wood, the cost of the metal, the cost of the manufacturer, it's never going to equal a price that this is a unique piece that was made for that client that you designed. You should be able to determine that price. So with presented price, you're like, here's something I've designed for you. Here's something we believe you love. And it's $10,000, whatever the number is. That way, you know, you're getting covered for the fact that you're giving them a one-of-a-kind piece. And if the client says, you know, I don't really want to spend that, then fine, you can go shop it and find something else for them. But if you're going to be customizing a lot of pieces, and there's probably two reasons why most designers customize. One, sometimes it's to actually get a better price because you have a great vendor and manufacturer that you work with, or it's truly to design something unique that you're building with artisans, and therefore, because it's one of a kind, it should have its own pricing. And some people will actually have presented price and still mark it up because the expediting of that piece is equally as important as the design of it. And then the disclosure is, you know, purchasing does not begin until, what we want to say is that please never start purchasing until you receive the money from the client. Too many people get stung by things like that. And it's just really important that before you do anything, you get the funds in, and the clients are very aware that you're not purchasing one thing. You know, and sometimes you'll have a long-term relationship with somebody, or you're shopping and you're overseas, and you're like, you send them a picture and say, you have to have this. And the client's like, yes, I'll get you the money. But, you know, you trust them enough, the relationship's deep enough, you can still do that, but be very careful because there's so many people who get stuck. That's why there's a ton of inventory in studio, because people have bought things that they can't sell, and you just don't want to be loaded with inventory. And then, you know, we have a language about antiques because when a couple of times when the economy has slipped and people have tried to sell what they were told was an antique and found out it was not, then the designer gets in trouble. And this happened back in 2008 and 9 when the financial crisis, and people needed to sell off some of the stuff they had bought. They found out that it wasn't actually authenticated. And so what we recommend that you do is that you have language in your agreement that basically says we are not responsible for the authentication of that item, and that we highly suggest that you find someone to authenticate that particular antique or painting or whatever it is, so that that liability is off of you. Julie, you want to just talk about receiving warehouse?
Sure. So from a contract perspective, right, who owns that, the relationship with the receiver, meaning who's paying the receiver and who's overseeing the insurance needs. Different firms handle it a number of different ways. Is your design firm's client paying the receiver directly? Maybe you're managing the items and the install, but the actual exchange of funds is from the client to the receiver. And then insurance becomes another really big question, right? How do you handle riders? Is the receiving warehouse insured to the level that you want them to be insured, given the level of the project? And if you don't know, again, I would say that's okay, but we absolutely need to find that out. And you should have certificate of insurance, right, for all of your vendors, especially in this type of capacity as well. Yeah.
Great. I think the next slide, we touched on accepting payments through Studio Pay, which you can do ACH, wire. You know, I think that it's secure, it's tight, and it's a great way to sort of manage the dollars. I was just thinking, Julia, just given the time, since we sort of went over that, we should jump to the next project.
Well, and StudioPay did get an upgrade, and I do think it will be a separate session at the user conference too. So if someone does have specific questions or wants to go through any type of upgrade, we'll absolutely be discussing it in greater detail. Project management, in terms of processes and efficiencies and procurement, go hand in hand, right? And most of our project management should be within Studio Designer, within the software, right? And so how are we utilizing the software to be efficient and effective? I believe actually somebody just asked this on Instagram, and my answer immediately was, reports, right? What are your favorite or most used, right? What are those reports for the firm? Everybody's answer is going to be a little bit different. The report writer nowadays I honestly, and I mean this is amazing, right? The number of reports that can be generated out of Studio are above and beyond, I think, anything, right, you and I would have ever imagined, right, 10 or 20 years ago. And so in terms of expediting specifically, you should always have 3 separate reports. And they should be customized because everybody's using slightly different codes. Everyone is using colors in a different way, but your expediting reports should have three meanings. They should be internal, so that the team is using it, the design team, accounting, the senior designer, the expediter. There should be a client-facing one that's beautiful and lovely. So hopefully none of us are doing anything in a Google Sheet or in an Excel online or any type of tracker that's manual, where you're re-entering the spec, you're re-entering a picture, you're linking it with a URL. That shouldn't exist. And so if it does, it is such a great time to sort of ask yourself, oh my gosh, how did I get here? And all of this needs to be generated in Studio. So if you set it up then out of the gate with the click of a button, right, every Friday or every Monday, you're able to pull these expediting reports. Something else that we recommend that usually is, depending on how you work with your receiver, is a receiving expediting report. So it's a report that goes directly to your receiver. So it'll have different fields, it'll have different codes on it, but it is another just great communication tool.
Definitely.
Just a tip is if we are not familiar, right? Again, that little bubble, that circle, one of my favorite tools that's expanding in terms of color codes, that should be on an expediting report, because those codes should be an expediting communication project management tool. So if they're not, make them, right? Again, great time of year, beginning of year. We'll be talking a lot about them at the user conference. We get asked the question of, well, how do you usually see these, right? How are other firms doing it? And so we definitely have some recommendations. I know this sounds silly, but red is a problem color, right? Everyone should have red be their problem color because it's very glaring, right? So, and then I always ask, so our clients are I don't want brown to be my color. So, people have different opinions about it, but as long as the firm is consistent, you could add the priority color to any expediting report. And so if you haven't done that, go try it. If you don't know how, email support, they could show you how you could add it on. Images and balances, another great communication tool. So if you're not running a client total balance report, if that name doesn't ring a bell, it's in the Studio report section. It's a great communication tool to allow the client to understand their balances, and you could add expediting fields to it. So you could send a client a balance report to say, client, Mr. and Mrs. Smith, you owe me $27,000. Here's the items that it's coming from. Oh, and by the way, all of these items are getting installed in 3 weeks, so I need this balance prior to installation. And it's communicated in one beautiful package.
Yeah, that's great. Hey, Julie, we have about 2 minutes to get through this, so we can do some Q&A.
So project management tools. Oh, so actually somebody's asking about certificate of insurance. So who obtains COIs? I think that's another, if you're not doing that and if you're not managing that in Studio, there's a field for that. We'll be learning more about it in February. If we're not using our automation tools, Studio Capture and hyperlinking, I know Anthony and I talk about it. I feel like every time we're together, and we'll be talking about it more again at the user conference, specifically about what that means for efficiency purposes. And actually, I will say the number of users that come to us that don't know that Studio has the ability to make RFQs and spec onlys is greater than less than. So if you're doing that again, either separately in a software or in another software or manually, just make sure that you're researching how to do that in Studio Designer.
Definitely. So under profitability on
Yep.
procurement, you know, it's important to understand what it takes to do something, right? So if you don't track your hours, then you never know whether your markup is covering, if that's how you work, your costs. So just being able to track the number of hours and to really have a tight look at what it's taking to, you know, work in your procurement model, so that, you know, whether it's you continue to charge hourly, which you wouldn't get hurt, but if you're just strictly charging a markup once the client selects the item, then you need to know whether it will cover your time and what's the efficiency of that person or staff that is working on that. Julie, you want to talk about greater margin?
Yeah, so same as, right, I would say expediting reports, right? If you go to your report section in Studio and just type in profit, you'll get a plethora of memorized profit reports. Even the generic ones out of the software, they're amazing, right? So as long as you're playing with the filters even a little bit, your goal should be to understand which clients are the most profitable and which sales codes are the most profitable, right? Are you potentially selling so much of a certain thing? So if you haven't looked at that, that's definitely part of this big conversation of, right, how do you manage the procurement markup dollars, and where can you where can you gain a leg up on that? Freight and warehouse costs, I think there's actually a couple of questions about that. So why is freight a sales code and another costs? So it's a great question. I think different firms utilize it differently. You can only utilize other costs in terms of the freight. So you can put the selling side as zero and only into other costs, or you could do it both ways. I think we definitely see it across the board. Keith, how about overall margins, right? That's a big one. And I think people don't look at it.
It's a big one because we're often, one of the times when we analyze the financials of a company, we look all the time to see, you know, everyone says, oh, my markup's 35%, I make 35%. And then we look at it and it's like 28%. And why is it 28%? Because mistakes happen. Sometimes you have to eat it, or some things fell through the cracks and you didn't bill it. And so that will point out whatever that markup is. Some things have delays, meaning that you may have booked the income or the expense without the income. And so you need to make sure that that's tracked within the same month. But really, if you really want to understand, are you getting your full markup? It's to really analyze your financials to determine that. And then it'll really determine whether or not you're giving a lot away or you're making a lot of mistakes. You know, are there missed things that you thought should have been in a particular order that weren't. So again, we're trying to help you create the greatest profitability. And by doing that, it's really staying on top of the numbers.
And keeping an eye on that, right, as a project moves forward. But we then always say at the end, like, that needs to be reviewed for the design team and the principal to understand what truly happened. I mean, I'm always just going to the bottom and looking at the bottom because I'm not going to know the ins and outs of the items. But because it's so granular and it should be such a great indicator, especially as a project is wrapping up, that should be one of your go-tos for sure.
Yeah, for sure.
There are a few questions, especially relating to a couple of things we talked about. So someone is asking, what is the best way to communicate to a client that they shouldn't be doing any purchasing? You know, would you put this in your contract as an example?
I think it should definitely be in your contract, but I think you have to talk to the client and let them know, because it's sometimes very difficult to explain something in a paragraph, right? Where when you're in front of a client, you can simply say to them, here's why we do it this way. Here's what you can expect from us. Then they understand it. But if it's just a paragraph and they think, no, I'm just going to do my own purchasing, then it's, you know, so it's a combination of both. It should definitely be secured in the contract. And by the way, I just want to say this about contracts. Your clients always have more money than you do. So if you ever have to bring out your contract to point to it because there's a problem, the relationship is lost. So you really only want the contract purpose is truly to create expectations on both sides. So it's really important that you that you don't have to go to your contract for that, but that you do have all those expectations lined in the contract. But talk to the client, let them know what your process is like.
And potentially a minimum spend too, like that could just deter some clients out of the gate. And it doesn't have to be $5 million, but really for a client to understand that we're going to have an expectation. This is the level, or this is the amount of money that you need to spend with us as a firm, both for product and for fees, for us to be able to move forward together too.
Yes.
Quick question about, is there a way to change the codes for all items at once versus going into each individual item? So the answer to that is yes, you could bulk update. And so perhaps searching bulk update in the knowledge base would be helpful, but it's in your item screen. So yes, you could bulk update colors and you could bulk update codes. I've seen some recommendations to add freight, receiving, delivery as a separate line item, so not in other costs. Is there an advantage for one over the other? As so many of these example, right, or questions of terms of, I don't think that there's a right or a wrong, like the expediting junior, senior. I don't think that there's a right or a wrong. I think it really depends on the firm and the structure. So freight versus other cost freight, just be consistent. So I like other cost freight, but only from a reporting standpoint, because that's the easiest way for me to understand true inbound freight. No, not receiving in warehouse, but true inbound freight. That's my go-to. So if a firm is consistent with that, I could easily understand profitability on product versus profitability on freight. But you could do the same thing in freight as a sales code. You're going to run into the situation of what happens if you have crate and barrel and they have inbound freight. You're going to have to make 2 items. So just personal preference, and how do you want to set that database up?
Hey, Julia, will you scroll to the next screen so as we answer the questions, people can see
Sure.
the information about the conference?
Yeah, so much of this I think will be covered in depth and in greater depth at the user conference. As everyone knows, we'll be able to do a lot of live Q&A, which is fantastic. I think there's always a lot of great information exchanged, and learning how others are doing it and why others are doing it a certain way, right? Why is somebody using freight in the sales code versus freight and other costs? And I think there was a question, why is it set up that way? And that's really the answer, right? Because firms are handling it a number of different ways, and then they're utilizing their reports to get to the data that they need.
Right. And as we were talking about this, one of my favorite things that we've set up with the conference is that we are going to have a genius bar with the support team, so that if you come with just very specific questions that you've been struggling with, you will have the ability to meet quite a few of our support people and work with them. But like Julia said, just the top level communication that you can have with other firms will be amazing. And as we said in the beginning, the space is getting limited. So if you are planning on attending, we suggest you sign up as soon as possible. And the link is here on this slide.
I think probably one more question. So can you repeat the bit about the insurance coverage regarding receiving warehouses? So I would say typically, right, your receiver's not going to be covered for a full, they're covered for damages, right? But up to, let's say, $1 million or $2 million policy. But what happens if the receiver blows up or catches on fire? And is that likely? No. But how do you know how much, what the value of all the items are in their facility? And if you're working on a high-end project, that usually just comes out in that contract negotiation, because the clients a lot of times will ask, who's going to carry the rider? So is it the receiver? Is it the designer, the design firm, or is it the client? So depending again on the level of projects, just make sure that A, you're having those discussions, and then B, that your contract covers you as well. Maybe one more. What are your favorite reports to run?
I just want to say the slide that's up actually doesn't show the link, but we did put it in the chat. So if you look at the chat, you'll see it there.
Oh, perfect. What are your favorite reports? That's a great question, and it's a tough question. I would bucket them into utilizing some sort of project worksheet internally, a client total balance externally, right? That's client facing, and then expediting reports again internally and externally. So, and that's not even talking about financial reports, but that really is staying with procurement and project management.
Yeah. I think we're almost at time.
Yeah, we are at time.
You guys definitely wrapped it up right on time. That's awesome. Well, thank you all for attending. We really appreciate your engagement. Your questions are super helpful. Being in support myself, very heavily. Understanding the points of view from a designer's, perspective is super helpful. The information that you and Julia shared today, Keith, again, super insightful and very helpful to me personally. So we can better care for our studio designer community from a support standpoint. That being said, there will be a recording available to you all that registered that will be emailed to you later on. And outside of that, we hope you all have a great day and we'll catch you next time.
Great. Thank you
Okay,
all.
thank you. Yeah, it's
Are
nice to
we,
see you.
with the next webinar, we have one more coming up, right?
We have one more coming up, though I can't tell you the date if Anthony
Do
can.
you have that date?
Yes, I do actually.
I just,
2 seconds here.
the
That
18th. Sorry.
18th.
Yeah.
The 18th. Okay.
You got me.
So
Yeah,
we'll
the
see you again. And the subject of that one is?
designer deep dive, new
Yeah.
insights, and tools. So that ought to be a real good one.
Ooh,
I know we got some new tools coming out real soon that are cool. So
Awesome.
that sounds, I want to
Thank you,
join.
everybody, for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you on the 18th.
Thank you.
All right.
take care.
Have a good
All
day.
right, talk to you all soon. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.